should be
This
better.
call is being recorded.
Okay, so an intro to Holacracy is what I'm trying to do on this call. You were introduced a little bit, basically told that, yeah, Mementia is using Holacracy for self-management, probably by your recruiter or Treda. You've seen some things happening in the process, but you weren't probably kickstarted or introduced properly. So that's what I'm trying to do on this call. So Holacracy is basically a replacement for your boss. That's the whole idea. So the idea is to not have a hierarchical organization with bosses, with managers. The idea is to have a potentially hierarchical organization, but without bosses. So the rules are your boss, basically. And the basic principles are governmental principles. So the same mechanisms that manage countries are used in Holacracy to manage people, with a very large emphasis on individual responsibilities and individual action, meaning that whenever we can address something by giving you more freedom to do what you can do, we do that. We don't take authority away from you unless it's absolutely necessary. So by default, you have all the authority. In Holacracy, everything is allowed by default. So you can do absolutely everything you want to do. And only when we have issues because of that, which we call tensions, then we can decide to mitigate that, update rules, take away authority if we need to. But by default, we start from a position of total freedom to do everything you need to do your job. And your job equals your role. So the role defines what's expected from you. It defines the expectations and the outcomes that we want to get from a person filling that role. So in Holacracy, we always talk about roles. We don't talk about individual people, except in several exceptions. We don't get personal in Holacracy. We talk about roles. So we talk about, in our case, we talk about QA engineer, which is a role. We talk about requirement specialist, which is a role. We talk about e-commerce specialist, which is a role. DevOps, and so on. So those are all roles. They're filled by different people. Most people have multiple roles, unless it's a very large organization with super specialized, people. But people can take on other roles. You can have multiple roles, and also roles can be filled by multiple people as well. So you can have multiple people in the same role, like for example in QA. You can also have a hierarchy of circles in a larger organization. We don't have that at the moment in Mementia. We used to have a QA circle, which was basically like a person to us. It was like a role to us. And it was managed internally by QA themselves. So they have the same structure as we have in the Erica circle. Right now in Mementia, we just have a single circle, and we have roles in that circle. Partners are all people who basically sign up for working at Mementia and sign up for following the constitution that we have. We have an almost entirely unmodified constitution that you can get from GitHub. And that document is our, CEO. That document is the person who's basically above us all, and we have to follow that. There's no easy way to change the constitution. So that's kind of an unmodifiable document. We can all agree to modify it, but it's not easy to do that through the usual process. It happens outside the governance. So for all intents and purposes, the Constitution is something that's governing all of what we're doing. So that's the most basic fundamental rules and responsibilities, just like in a country with a constitutional system of government, right? You have a constitution. The constitution should be hard to change, and all of the laws and regulations in a country have to comply with the constitution. You can't have a rule that says something different to the constitution. If the constitution says do X, you can't say don't do X in a rule below that. Right? So the constitution is virtually unmodified. You can get the source from GitHub. The current version is 4.1 that we're following. Version 5.0 will be coming out soon. It will be simplified, shortened, so we'll definitely adopt that when it becomes available. The Constitution talks about partner responsibilities. It talks about how the system for changing the rules that govern us works, which is called governance. And it talks about how things like communication and prioritization work between partners and roles. So it gives you a kind of a basic operating system for working in a holacracy-based organization like Mementia. You can use those rules at any time. You have the right to expect other people to follow those rules because we all signed up for that. We signed the document and we have to follow those rules. Each one of us, we're all equal under the Constitution. There's no hierarchy between roles in the same circle. So there is no boss that you have other than the Constitution itself. And of course, every organization has its own specific rules. And instead of adding to the Constitution, we create what's called governance, which is basically laws under the Constitution. So we create those rules. Every partner who has an assigned role, so in other words, every role can modify governance. So you have the right to do that because you're assigned a role. Other people in Mementia have the right to do that because they're assigned a role. And the Constitution says how this is done. So for some things, it's as easy as changing a piece of text at any time. For other things, it's a more involved process. So it depends on what it is. But in all cases, you can do that. And whenever you see something that's not the way you would like to see it, you have the responsibility to change that. So one of the fundamental responsibilities of every partner, every role, is processing tensions. And the tension in the Constitution is defined as anything that's different from what you would expect. Anything that's different from the potential you sense, meaning that it's a problem for you, it's an issue for you, or you feel that it should be different. Okay. And one of the most common problems for people in organizations with holacracy is that they don't process tensions enough. So they just sit on problems. They look at things and they say, hey, it's somebody else's problem, right? And they say, okay, somebody's thinking about this. Or they think, hey, this is how it should be. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe I just don't understand things. You know, I can see it's stupid, but yeah, probably somebody's thinking about it. That's not my problem. I'm just going to do my job. Well, if it's preventing you from doing your job effectively, then it's a tension that you must process, that you're responsible for processing under the Constitution. So it's not something that's optional. It's totally required. And that's one of your first duties as a partner in the Constitution, is to process tensions. That's called duty of processing. That's the first duty of every partner. So in other words, it means asking a lot of stupid questions. Hey guys, I was just wondering about this, you know, rule that we have, or I was wondering how we do this, or I was wondering why we do this way. You can start the conversation with that, but you can also directly also ask other people to do things. You can ask other partners to provide you with certain outcomes. So you can ask them to do projects for you. And you can propose to change governance as well if the governance is the problem. So we usually say in holacracy, there are 5 ways to process attention. There are 5 pathways, we call it. This is not strictly a part of the Constitution, but it's basically the way to process tensions in an effective way. So you can do or ask for a next action, which is a single step. You can do or ask somebody for a project outcome, which is more than one step, right? You can ask somebody to do something for you so that you can do your job better. You can also change governance, which you have the right to. You can ask for help, which is a valid pathway. Or you can share or ask for sharing information, which you don't have. So those are the 5 pathways for processing a tension. And any tension that you see, so any difference between your expectation and and the actual state is attention. So think about this as a QA, because you used to do QA before, right?
Yes.
So look at the business, look at how you're working as a QA person, and say, okay, this is a bug, and this bug, okay, this is the expected result, this is the actual result. That's attention. So tensions are bugs in a business.
Okay.
And everybody is a QA in Holacracy. Everybody has to write them down and process them. And since we're using GlassFrog, which is a piece of software for easier management of Holacracy, you have a place to capture your tensions there. In other words, to write them, and you have a way to process them there, which is easier than doing it manually, which you also can. Most of the work, well, all of the work we do in Mementia is captured in Jira and issues. And issues are kind of projects for us. So feel free to do that as a way to process your tensions. Just don't be quiet about it. Just don't let it go, right? If you let it go, then nothing gets fixed. And the problem with that is, at the end of the day, you will be a bad role filler. You will not do your job well if you don't process tensions.
Mm-hmm.
If you just do what other people tell you, if you don't think with your own head, if you just follow instructions, you're not doing your job well. That's not what's expected from you. Everybody is a manager in Holacracy, so you can't be just following orders, just executing your work, right? You can't turn off your brain and say, "Hey, I'm just gonna do, I'm just gonna do the daily routine and that's it." That's not that doesn't work in Holacracy at all. And people who used to try and do work like that left relatively quickly when they try and do that. That's just not possible in Holacracy. So there are no managers, but everybody is a manager of themselves and their role. And you have to be proactive. You have to handle issues and you have to solve issues on your own. And that's just how it is. There's nobody else to go to. There's no manager. There is no boss. There is no person whose problem that is. It's your problem. There's nowhere to go. The buck stops at you. That's how it works.
Yeah.
So there is a special role in Holacracy called the lead link. I'm currently filling that role. That role is not a boss. Okay. That role has nothing to do with being a boss. That role's purpose is to handle the circle's purpose, so to the outside world. Basically, that role is accountable for the circle, right? So that role is the circle. It's a one-person circle, right, for everybody else, because nobody else cares about Holacracy outside of Mementia. So I'm supposed to process tensions that come from the outside to Mementia, as Mementia is not doing its job well, right? So that's one thing. And I would process those tensions by the same 5 pathways that I'm using as anybody else. I also manage resources, meaning that I can assign people. So LeadLink can assign people to roles. And also based on the performance of people, they can also remove people from roles or reassign them. So change the assignment.
Okay.
So I'm tracking performance. And again, it's not my job to tell you how to do your job. I can provide advice. But at the end of the day, I can just tell you, hey, you're not fit to the role as the role is written, and your role is written in the governance just like any other role, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm not imagining things. I'm just looking at what's written, and I can see, okay, you're expected to do X. You don't seem to be doing X at all, or you don't seem to be doing X well. This is how I feel you should be doing things so that you fit your role better. So I'm not micromanaging. I'm telling you the outcome, what's expected from you. If you keep ignoring that, if you keep doing whatever you feel is right instead of what the role is, how the role is written, then I will remove you from the role. And if there are no other roles I can assign you to, you will leave. That's how it is. And somebody else will fill that role. So that's my job. But I'm not managing your work. I'm not making decisions for you. I'm treating you as an adult. I'm expecting you to do your job as you're expected to, and your expectations are clearly indicated in governance in your role definition. So there can be no misunderstanding about that. Okay. Now, somebody can say, hey, there can be misunderstanding about anything, right? Written things, that doesn't mean that other people can't interpret them different ways. That is true. Everybody can interpret things in their own way. However, once there is a misunderstanding, for example, I interpreted one way as lead link, you interpreted another way as the role filler, we can ask the special role called secretary to interpret that for everybody and say, yes, you know, Dusan is right or Ognjen is right, nobody's right. This is what it is, right? And they interpret the text as kind of a judge that works in Holacracy. So that's the secretary special role. The secretary special role is to interpret things and to manage the written records that we have. So to manage governance, to manage any outputs we have from the governance, and that's what they do. So they're kind of a judge, kind of a judicial branch, if you will, in Holacracy, which is like the court system, which is like the justice system in a country.
Okay.
So that's the secretary and the lead link. The third special role is the facilitator. The facilitator's job is to make sure that on special meetings, constitutionally required meetings, which is the tactical meeting and the governance meeting, people follow the rules. People behave the way they should behave according to the format in the Constitution. And facilitator's job is also to monitor how we're doing Holacracy, and in case that the governance process doesn't work for specific reasons, they declare a process breakdown, which is a special process defined in the Constitution. So their job is to basically manage the meetings according to a very strict format defined in Constitution. Holacracy enables people with very poor social skills to work effectively, which is something that we may have from time to time. There are people who, you know, are on the spectrum, but they're really great specialists in what they do. And they generally have problems with interpersonal conflicts, communication, and especially tensions that happen between them and other people. So the facilitator is supposed to help those people express the issues they have in a neutral way, non-personal way, so that they can be handled using the 5 pathways process and handle without any aggression, any conflict, any bad feelings between people, handled in a totally professional way. Because again, we're talking about roles, not people. We're talking about processes. We're not being personal at all, right? The only personal thing happens between you and the lead link when the lead link tells you, hey, you're not fit to the role, or you could be fit better if you do this and that, right? The other people don't really have the right to give you feedback. I mean, they can give you feedback, they can say whatever they want. We're not restricting speech, but they don't really matter. Only lead link matters in terms of performance, right? So in other words, other people can just ask you to do things according to the Constitution and the governance. They can expect you to do things that are in your role description, and that's it. They don't have any more access into what you're doing. Okay.
Okay.
So the expectations are, of course, in the role description. The expectations are accountabilities. You're accountable for something, meaning that other people can expect you to do that thing. And they're all listed in your accountability section in your role description. You can see that in Glassfrog. And those are the things that they have the right to expect you to be doing. Others don't have a right to be expecting you to do things, okay? That means that they can ask you. That also means that, of course, you can do them, right? But it means that nobody can hold you accountable for doing that, okay? So for example, you can do, not being assigned to the QA role, you can do QA's job. For example, if you're a partner not assigned to any roles, you can do QA if you want to, because you don't have anything better to do. But you have to follow the rules that QA has set, and that's it. So you feel free to do that. It's not The accountabilities don't prohibit you from doing things that are not in the accountabilities. However, in especially small companies, bosses like to expect people to do things that are not in their job description, right? You see job descriptions that are just like 3 lines, and then you have the person doing everything else. So you have a sysadmin who's doing like developer work. You have a secretary who's doing like everything in the office, right? Starting from tech support to. So that's what Holacracy is trying to avoid with role descriptions. Other people can, expect you to do things that are in the role description, but they can't expect you to do things that are not in the role description. And you would be doing badly for your role if you would be doing those things. That's an additional thing, because your job is to do your role the best way possible you can, right? And the only way to do that is to do your job and not do other people's jobs. If you do other people's jobs, you're not doing your job, which means you're not prioritizing properly. And you must prioritize your role work first and then anything else, because that's your job. So you have to do that first. That's the duty of prioritization. So when other people ask you to do things that are not part of your job, that's, that by default, you will say, hey, yeah, I can add that to my to-do list or in Jira, but I will do my role's job first and then everything else. That's how it works. Otherwise, you would be maybe being a nice guy, but you wouldn't be doing your job well, and you would get feedback about that from the lead link the next time you talk to the lead link. So every role should do their job. It's not your job to do other people's things. And if other people feel that you should be doing something more, they have the option of changing your role, just like you have the option of changing their role. You have that option. That's part of governance. There's nothing special about role descriptions. Anybody can change them at any time. So there should be no informal expectations. Actually, Constitution says that implicit expectations hold no weight. That's a literal quote from the Constitution. That means that when you have an expectation, if it's your expectation in your head, well, good luck with that, because that doesn't matter. If you expect something from somebody, you have to write it somewhere. You have to make it explicit so that the other person understands that. And in the governance process, you have the opportunity to object to, for example, somebody adding work to your role, or somebody changing the rules, expecting you to do other things. So it's an open process, and it can't happen with a single person. It happens in a collective way. And with changing governance, we all have the right to participate in that process. We all have the right to object, and we all have the right to improve change proposals, so that tensions that the new proposal creates are handled as well. Because it's not, one person solving their problems might create other problems for other people, or create tensions for different roles. So all roles should participate in the governance process so that you don't get a surprise. Because when governance can happen on Friday, on Monday you get to work and you ignored governance, and then you have a new job, right, on Monday that you don't know about. That can literally happen in Holacracy if you don't participate in the process. It's like, it's like not voting in a country. You get a president or a parliament that you don't like. That's like, okay, well, that's, you ignored the process that you had the right to. So it's the same here. So don't ignore that, is what I'm saying. If you ignore that, you risk the situation of having your job impossible or very hard to do. And you will be accountable when you say, hey, it's not possible to do this. Well, other people will tell you, well, where were you when we talked about it? And, you had the right to object. You had the right to help with that proposal. You were not there. So, feel free to come with a new proposal. Until then, you have to follow the rules that we have. So, if somebody added a rule to your role that you have to dance every time you before work, then you have to dance every time. You don't have an option. You can propose removing that, but you have to make sure that the tension is resolved and that the other person's tension, the other role's person tension is resolved as well. So don't skip governance, don't skip asynchronous governance, which is a kind of a offline way, not a meeting way to change governance. Because if you do that, you will your role can suffer. You will not be protecting your role. Your job should be focused on the role. That's your job. That's what you do. Your role should be aligned with the circle already. But if you see something that's conflicting, so that your role is doing great, but the circle will not be doing great if something happens, that's a tension, because everybody should be aligned with the circle as well. So if you see something that would be a problem for everybody, that's a circle tension. You must process that as well, even if it's not related to your role directly. Okay.
Okay.
So it's a very large level of autonomy, and you are expected to own your role, to be a complete owner and master of what you have. And one of the things you have that you are delegated by the circle in Holacracy are domains. Domain is a piece of a business process. It can be a physical thing, or it can be a thing like a website, or things like releases that we have. It can be multiple things, but it's something that you have full control over by default. So when we delegate, for example, the Mementia website to a role, right? We can say that we implicitly say, hey, that role controls that domain. So in other words, nobody can do anything with Mementia website except for that role, or with the permission of that role. So if you want to do something with Mementia website and you see that the domain is delegated to somebody, some role, then you have to ask that role for permission to do something with the website. That's how it works. So on a most basic level, domains are just a way to say, hey, go ask this role for permission to do this piece of work. You don't have to know all domains in advance, but when you have to impact domains, meaning that when something you're doing has a relationship with a domain, you have to check that domain, who's owning that domain, ask that person, ask that role for permission. So that's how it works. In larger organizations, even in Mementia, we have a lot of domains, so it's impossible to know in advance. Repeatedly violating other people's domains is not okay, but other people are also supposed to process the tensions you create by violating those domains. So they're supposed to tell you when you're violating a domain, right? If you're doing things on the live website, for example, and I don't know, QA owns the live website for the client, then QA is supposed to tell you, hey, please don't do that anymore, okay? This is our domain, you have to ask for permission. And then you're supposed to react positively to that, apologize and say, okay, I didn't know. I didn't check, before I did this. I'm going to make sure to ask for permission next time.
Okay.
So that's how it works. When a domain has a policy in it, which is basically a set of rules on how you can impact the domain, then you have to read those policies and follow those policies. For example, on the website domain, I can say anybody is allowed to access and modify the website, but you have to ask without permission from, let's say, QA, right? But you have to ask for permission if you're changing, I don't know, front page content. So that's a valid policy, right? It defines who can do it. It defines, do you need to ask for permission or not? And in this case, you don't have to ask them for permission because you were granted permission by the policy itself. The policy says everybody can modify the website. So you don't have to explicitly ask for permission because it's already explicit in the policy. And you can just go and do it. So this is a way to kind of automate permissions, right? Policies automate permission giving for domains. So they authorize you to do things. If a policy says updating the website should be done like this, and then it specifies how, then the policy is not clear enough because the policy must say who is allowed to do it. You have to explicitly allow, so the policy has to say everybody can update the website if they follow these rules. So conditionally. okay? If the policy is just a technical documentation, which is what we had recently in governance, right? We had a document that we worked on, and then somebody just took that document, copy pasted it into a policy. That doesn't work because policies are permissions, policies are authorizations. They're not technical documentation. They can say how to do things, but they have to be specific in terms of who is allowed to do them as well, and is anybody allowed. If it's not explicit, then you have to ask for permission. Otherwise, you're violating the policy. Okay. So those are the policies. You can have policies delegated to roles, and this is most policies. And roles can change these policies anytime. If they change them, an email would come from Glassfrog telling you about that. This is a requirement from the Constitution. When you change a policy, you have to tell everybody about it in the circle, because otherwise people would not know that there was a change and they wouldn't be able to follow it, right? So when you change a policy, automated systems like Glassfrog will tell other people about it, but other people have to know when you change it. It's a good idea to tell them in chat as well if it's something important, because emails are can be delayed with reading. Some people can already process their email for today and they don't know, so it's a good idea to let people know as well in chat. If a policy doesn't belong to a role, then it regulates a process that's in the circle that impacts multiple roles, meaning that nobody's allowed to change it, but also everybody is allowed to change it through governance. So it's a common policy. So think of this as a kind of a, in the government, you have counties, let's say municipalities in Europe, right? You have municipalities, you have local government, and you have the parliament, which is the central government, right, in a parliamentary republic. So think of anchor circle policies as laws on the parliamentary level, and think of delegated domains and delegated policies to the roles as municipality laws, right? So on the local level, roles can change anything they want. On a global level, because it impacts different roles, they have to go to the governance process and they have to change them that way. So then that becomes the change proposal, the same way that you would create new roles, modify accountabilities, and things like that. So when a domain belongs to anchor circle, everybody can impact that domain if they follow those policies by default. That's written in the Constitution. But if you want to change those policies, you have to go to the circle. You have to have a governance meeting, or you can use synchronous governance to change this. And obviously, if somebody new, you would just ask for help on how to do this. The most important part of your job is not the mechanics of holacracy, which is, what would be a lawyer's work in the real world, right? That's not important. The important part is that you see the need to change something. You see that a policy is bad. You see that a policy is preventing you from doing work. And I'll give you a great example. Let's say the client live website domain belongs to the circle, so everybody can impact that. And the policy says everybody can make live changes. But on the other hand, you have QA accountable for bugs, right? So it turns out that QA is accountable. QA is responsible for bugs, but everybody can change the live site and create bugs, right? And QA has no control over that. That's not fair, and that makes it harder for them to do their job. So the tension is, hey, give us this domain. So delegate this domain to QA so that QA owns it, or write in the policy in the anchor circle domain, ask QA for permission before changing anything, because QA has to test things and has to find bugs. We don't want the clients to be finding bugs. So that's a good example of that situation.
Yeah, understood.
Policies can be badly written. Most of the time, policies are badly written because people either don't have experience with writing good rules, or are new to holacracy, or are new to writing processing, or everything together. So feel free to ask for help. Again, focus on the tension, not the proposal. The proposal you can get help with. You can get help with the text, with the words, with the rules. Some of the rules are can be complicated in certain cases, and that's why I'm not talking about them at all. You have roles who are responsible for coaching you. You have roles who are responsible for helping you follow the process, like the facilitator, which is the constitutional role. So just focus on the problems, just focus on the tensions, just focus on things that should be changed. Tell people about that, ask for help, and then people will help you to turn those into changes that will work. At the end of the day, you are accountable for your role. And if you did not do anything, if you have just looked at the problem without doing anything, that's your problem. And that can result from you being reassigned from the role because you didn't do your job. So if we rank the priority, the constitutional duties of partners, which is processing, prioritization, and transparency, the three duties that we have in the Constitution, they are much more important than anything else you do. So if you focus on those, you would be doing totally right, because that's the most important thing. And anything you receive from other roles must comply with the Constitution and governance as well. So it's like driving, right? You expect other people to follow the same rules. And if you see somebody who's not following those rules, you totally have the right to ask them to do that. And if you see a repeated violation of that, then that's a tension, and you have to process that tension using the 5 pathways. So, if you see somebody who's repeatedly not following the rules, then you have several options. You can say, hey, please follow the rules. It's clear, let's please do that. You see them again doing that. You say, okay, what's the problem? You have a written policy or accountability or whatever it is, or the Constitution. You're not following that. So help me understand what I can do to have you follow that, because I need that to do my job. And the other person can share, their problems. But at the end of the day, if somebody keeps repeatedly violating a policy, he's not a good match for Holacracy. We need people who follow rules. So that's a basic requirement. So if you're a person who kind of, drives, rolls through the stop sign when nobody's around, then you're not a good person for Holacracy. You have to follow rules. When we don't follow them, when we don't implement them literally, then we have bad rules that nobody's following. And some people on the team have that tendency, right? Because of working in different organizations, working in an organization that was historically hierarchical, and most organizations have rules that nobody follows. That's just the truth. Especially large organizations have rules that are only just written. They're not actually followed. Holacracy is not like that. Holacracy doesn't work at all if you're not following rules. So it's catastrophic in Holacracy to not follow rules, because then it's just anarchy. It's totally out of control, because you already don't have bosses, right? So the rules are the only thing that's keeping the order and team discipline and gets the job done. If you're not following the rules, then you're removing the only thing that's preventing Holacracy from becoming a chaotic structure, which is not what you want to have. Holacracy is actually very structured. So following rules is super important. And the best way to fight bad rules is to implement them literally, okay? Like Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to repeal a bad law is to literally implement that law. It's to literally follow it. That's the best way to do it, because that creates problems for multiple people and multiple roles. And then those problems create tensions. Those tensions get processed. Eventually, the bad rule will get changed. So that's how it should be. It's how it shouldn't be is, hey, we have a bad rule. Let's just ignore it, and let's just do our jobs despite that rule, and let's not fix it. That's not how it works. Unfortunately, that's how it works in many countries with bad laws. But that's how it can't work in a holacracy, because we're not a government, we're not a country, we're for profit. We have to do our jobs. And if we're not doing our jobs well, then the clients will not pay us, and then we will go bankrupt and close and disappear. So that's what happens. This is a business. So that means you have to follow rules literally. That means that even against your common sense at some point, because the system has to work. If you have a bad rule, make a point of following the bad rule and see what happens. If it's not creating attention for you, okay? If it's creating somebody else attention, you're doing them a favor by following the rule and allowing them to process the tension themselves. Okay? If it's preventing you from doing your job, then you have a direct duty to process that tension and to change that rule, to change the policy, to change the accountability, to change the domain delegation, role definition, whatever it is, because you can change all of that. Okay?
Okay.
So you're not doing anybody a favor by not following rules. You're not doing anybody a favor but by not being literal. And even if it's creating issues for other people, feel free to do that. That's great. The basic principle in Holacracy, we call it TDE, is tensions drive everything. That's what creates a good, healthy system. If everybody avoids tensions, if nobody's processing tensions, that's an unhealthy holacracy, holacracy organization. That's a bad system because nobody's actually allowing the system to work. And that's a natural tendency. So pay attention to that. That will probably happen to you too. You will see that, hey, there is a stupid rule that I'm required to follow. It would be much simpler for me not to do it, not to follow it, just to ignore it like everybody else, and I'll make things easier for other people as well. So it's a total win-win. No, you're doing the worst possible thing you could do in that situation. The best possible thing you can do is follow the rule literally, process the tension if it affects you, let other people know if you feel that it will be a problem for them. You know, you don't have to be a jerk about it. You can tell them, right? Hey, I have this, we have this stupid thing. I have to follow it because, we're working in a holacratic organization. I have to follow the rule. Maybe it's a good idea for you to change the rule because, you can't be expecting people not to do what you wrote there or what somebody else wrote there. And you can let them know, and you can change governance at any time, pretty much, right? It's a 5-minute thing to change a single sentence or something. It's not hard. It's just that people can be lazy, or people just take shortcuts. People like to do their job and not, worry about other things. Again, you would be a great citizen. You would be a great partner in holacracy by not doing that, but doing the exactly opposite and literally interpreting all the governance, all the rules we have, because that's the only way we can fix them. If we avoid doing them, then we can't improve, and then problems don't get solved, and then we just rot from the inside. That's not how it works. So, do you have questions so far? Because I'm ready to stop here for this session.
Yeah, I think I understand. I mean, there's a lot. So
there is, and there isn't. Also, it's a very basic system.
It's a basic system where I need to follow my accountabilities.
Yes.
And that's basically it. And to follow the rules and to
follow
check
the Constitution. Yes, follow the Constitution. Follow what's in your role description, and respect other people's domains and anchor domains. That's what you need to do.
Ask for permission if that's the case, or don't touch it if that's the case.
If you're not sure, ask. By default, you're allowed to do everything, and it's much like people say, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. So apply that principle, because you can't be expected to read all of governance and to keep it in your head. That's just not possible. You have a search function in Glassfrog, so you can use that. But feel free to do things. Feel free to make mistakes. Apologize. Don't make them again. But that's better than being afraid to do things.
Yeah, understood.
By default, if there is no rule about it, if there is no policy preventing you from, if there isn't a domain delegated to role, or if it's not regulated by Holacracy, it's allowed. Okay, so if you can do it, you can do it. By default, you're not prohibited from doing things. So by default, so Holacracy is not permissive. Holacracy is prohibitive, meaning that Holacracy prohibits things, everything else is allowed. So you can do everything you want to do, and everything you need to do your job, you can do. You're allowed to do.
Okay.
Right now, we have two roles that are very relevant to understanding holacracy. The first role is secretary, whose job is to interpret governance. So if you don't understand a piece of text anywhere, you can ask secretary to do the interpretation for you.
Okay.
That's the first thing. And then we have a role called Holacracy Coach, which is filled by myself, and that's why we're having this call. I'm doing my job. So you can also ask me about clarifying things about Holacracy. Just one thing about that: secretary is a constitutional role, and their opinion is authoritative, meaning that once they interpret something, it's kind of the law, right? It's the new law. However, I'm not. So those are strictly my opinions. I'm more like a lawyer, which is, just providing his opinions about things that can be wrong and right. So everything I told you might not be true, but you have the Constitution. You can read it yourself, and it says what it says. It's very clear. So nobody's opinion is more important than anybody else's except the secretary's. So the secretary is the only person who can say, "Hey, yes, you understood this correctly. That's how I feel." And if the secretary is not doing their job well, then we have an option of removing of electing somebody else. So we have elections for constitutional roles because they're so important, and we can elect somebody else to be the secretary if they're not able to do their job.
Right.
So my job is just to help you understand these basic principles. And I will try and not help you in particular situations where you can use regular processes and secretary and so on, because we need the system to work. I'm kind of just the baby wheels for you until you're able to, do things yourself. And of course, I'm more than happy to help you with the text if you need to change rules and stuff. Again, I will just follow what you want to do. I will not insert my opinions there. I will just work on making it a good rule, because you can make stupid rules, of course. Like we live in countries with a lot of bad laws, right? You have a lot of bad laws in your country. We have a lot of bad laws here, and so people are good at making bad rules. So want to avoid that, because bad rules create problems. But again, it's not always about rules. We can also sometimes delete rules that we don't need, because we have a tendency, especially in ex-communist, ex-socialist, or currently socialist countries, we have this tendency of creating rules just because, and that's not enough for something. You have to have an actual tension. And if the tension is, hey, we don't have a rule about this, then that's not a tension. That's not. Our goal shouldn't be to have all possible rules for all possible situations. Our goal is to have the least number of rules possible, because we don't need them. Why do we need the bureaucracy? We don't need it. So if we can delete something, let's delete it. If we need to remove something, let's remove it. If we don't need it, everything should have a reason. Everything should have a purpose. If it doesn't, then it's just bureaucracy, and we don't need that. Obviously, that's the worst thing we can have.
Okay.
So it's more about individual freedom. It's about enabling roles to do their job. And if the rules help them, okay. If the rules prevent them from doing their job, maybe the good question is, do we need this at all? I mean, what could happen? What we said something is prohibited, okay, but people are doing it anyway, and it could mean that the rule is bad. It could mean that the underlying system is bad, and these are hard questions. But it's not always the fact that we just need to write something and make it so, right? It's like it's like speed limits. People drive fast, and you can make the speed limit to, I don't know, 10 miles per hour. That will not help. People will still drive fast. So you need other things to do it as well if you want to reduce that. And it's also a question of how much freedom do you want to, how much liberty do you want to take away from the role, right? Because the role ideally should be able to do everything they need to do their job. So I want to give QA everything they can have to do their job better. And if the role is preventing them or having them do unnecessary things and bureaucratic things, then then we can delete that rule. And Also, the secretary can delete invalid rules, which is, for example, a policy can ask somebody to do something, right? Well, actually, it can't. If the policy says, "Hey, Dusan should dance every day," nobody cares, and that's not a valid policy. You can't have that because the policy regulates the domain, and if the policy in the domain website says, "Hey, Dusan should dance before work," then you can write that, but it won't do anything, and the secretary should just delete that policy because it's not a valid policy. The policy should talk only about the domain, right? It can't ask you to do things that are not allowed in the Constitution. It can't ask people to do arbitrary things because that way you could just write something, in your own little place. You write something and ask other people to do it, and they don't have a right to participate in that process. That's not how it works. So you can also have invalid policies that are not compliant with the Constitution, just like you can have a bad law that doesn't comply with the Constitution, right? It can get passed in the Parliament, but then usually the Supreme Court or the Constitutional Court can strike out the law, can say this law is not constitutional, we're deleting it. And the same way here, the secretary can do that. So just keep that in mind as well. We can have policies that are invalid right now, and I'm pretty sure we do. And if you see something that you feel is not compliant with the Constitution, that's not, you can have some free-form text in the policy, and it may not be a policy. And you can say, hey, this is not a policy. And you can ask the secretary to just delete that because it shouldn't be there. And again, that's how we have a healthy system. Because if nobody does that, then it will stay there. And maybe somebody will even follow it, thinking it's a good idea.
Okay.
So just question everything, protect your role's interests as opposed to other roles. Don't worry about them. They have a job to worry about themselves. Everybody's working under the circle's purpose, so we're all working to help our clients succeed, to make money for us, but to help them succeed and make money through that. And that's what we're doing. So that's your job. You don't want to worry about other people's roles and other people's jobs because that's their job.
Yeah, okay, understood. Follow my roles and ask questions on anything, slide by.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, communication is totally okay. And messages from partners, that's one part of the duty of prioritization, is that you have to prioritize messages from partners that you receive. So they're not less important than the work you do. They're more important than the work you do. Okay. And that's written in the Constitution. That's the duty of prioritization.
Okay.
So that's how we make sure that people are not slow or avoiding communication. You have to prioritize communication. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I figured that.
Okay, let's stop here for now. If you have more questions, we can, process them, maybe write them in Confluence for other people as well. And I'm gonna save this recording and put it in Confluence as well, so it's available.
Okay,
for other partners.
Some questions as
sure.
time goes by, and I will come to you with them.
Yeah. Well, we can have more sessions like this in the future. I hope with other new partners as well. So we push this forward. Okay, thank you, Dusan. Have a great rest of your Monday. Thank you. Bye.
Too. Thank you. Bye.